What did we learn from day one of Maple Leafs training camp? We'll dive into that and more on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. If you're wondering, what could I possibly wager on for that $5? Well, if you do feel good about the new look, new regime Maple Leafs, they are 15-1 to win the Stanley Cup at the start of training camp. I'm sure those odds are sure to fluctuate over the next several months. But that could be your $5 bet right there. Bet on your buds to finally get it done. Big day today, obviously, or yesterday rather, for those who are now listening to this on Thursday. Training camp opened up in terms of media day and the medicals, the physicals. So we got to hear from a lot of the Maple Leafs. We'll break down a lot of what we heard and what we found out. Got some answers to some questions that we had on yesterday's show. So we'll dive into all of that, but a bit of a ground shaking news item to attend to first that occurred early this morning before we even got through to training camp for the Maple Leafs. MLSE, the parent company that is the ownership group of the Toronto Maple Leafs, along with the Toronto Raptors, the Marlies, the TFC, and the Argos, and everything in between. Massive sale of 37.5% of ownership stake that Bell Media had. They're selling it to Rogers, and now Rogers becomes the sole, not the sole owner, but the majority owner of MLSE. The sale, $4.7 billion for 37.5% of their MLSE stake that they had in the company, which values MLSE at $12.5 billion, Dave. Unbelievable. But that was not news that I expected to wake up to today. And I'm curious, Dave, because I am obviously, I work for TSN, which is a Bell company. You work for Sportsnet, which is a Rogers company. So I'm curious, how we both think of this sale, I suppose, considering what we do for a living and who we work for a living. But what was your initial response or thoughts to the news of this sale?
Well, obviously surprised, did not see it coming. I think I was probably more surprised that Bell was selling more that Rogers was buying at first, because I was just like, MLSC's portfolio ever since Bell and Rogers took it over in 2011, I believe is when they first entered into it, has only skyrocketed since, right? Like ever since they bought their majority stake. And so that was my first reaction, was like, oh, like Bell is pretty much getting out of the ownership of the team of MLSE, which that was my kind of first surprise.
Oh, $4.7 billion is a decent reason to sell, I suppose. You could say.
Yeah. I mean, if someone was offering me $4.7 million today, I probably wouldn't think too much about taking that deal. Probably. Yeah. So, and just it threw a lot of things kind of in like a lot of like chatter about what this means for this, what this means for that. That's kind of like you hear a bit of the speculative, right? Like what does this mean for the media rights? What's this mean for, some of the future of the presidents and of the teams and things like that? How do the Blue Jays now figure into all of this now that, Rogers has pretty much all like this. Eventually, we see Toronto, the Blue Jays get a part of MLSE. Like, there's a lot of things that were kind of thrown out. I had a few questions thrown at me today, and I'm like, you're asking the wrong person because I am way down the pecking order line of that when it comes to knowing what's going on next. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean there are a lot of questions and nothing that's going to be finalized, nothing that we can really either us can answer, let alone the guys at the top who are making the deals. I'm sure they don't really know what the future holds either. Just that this deal is in place and it's set to come to fruition in mid 2025 is what I had read, and it basically gives Rogers the monopoly when it comes to running the sports empire here in Toronto, the largest city in Canada, one of the largest sports markets in the world. So Edward Rogers becomes a very, very powerful person here in the city of Toronto and the country of Canada, for that matter. With this acquisition, I am curious though if you think this will have any impact on the Maple Leafs and how they run things and the day-to-day operations moving forward with this sale.
Well, I mean, I kind of wonder what this means for Brendan Shanahan, right? Because Keith Pelly was brought in, I mean, not too long ago. I'm sure there was maybe some inkling from like when he took over that something like this was going to be a possibility. And just, what does this mean about who the teams report to, right? Now you've got the Rogers the Rogers board will eventually come into place and how we've heard a lot about the MLSE structure and the ownership structure and who reports to who. I'm curious to see how that changes with that, in the long-term future. Obviously, this is not something they have to worry about now, but come next year, it does change that.
Yeah, well, there's no more board, right? Like you always heard Ujiri and Shanahan, they have to go to the board. They got to go and get permission from the board. And it was always a three-headed board, right? You had Rogers, you had Bell, and you had Larry Tannenbaum. And Larry Tannenbaum is getting out also at some point here over the next little bit too. The expectation is that Rogers might take a run and become basically sole owners of the team. There's reports that they might end up selling off some of that stock or taking on additional investors within it, but that's all speculation right now, so we don't need to get into it. But man, it's intriguing, what this means moving forward for the landscape, how things will work out. I was speaking with Richard Deitch, who's a sports media reporter down with The Athletic, and he says in his line of work, it's usually not a great thing when you have a big monopoly like this, because it means that there's less competition, and I mean that basically means Rogers can do whatever the hell they want, and that could usually it means the consumers are the ones who end up paying at the end of the day. So that's one thing that I think we do need to keep in mind about this is hopefully that's not the case, but it is a caution, I guess, that it could mean higher ticket sales somehow. It could mean that the rights packages could be more expensive for whatever teams or whatever companies are looking to get them, in which case that's going to end up costing more money for the consumers to get those services as well. So that's kind of the cautionary tale, I guess, of monopolies like this in the past. We'll see what ends up coming of it, but did think that was a massive story. Obviously, the Maple Leafs essentially got sold today. Like that's a big time story. And the company is worth, over $12 billion now, this empire of MLSE. And I can only imagine how much the teachers' pension are just like sickened by the numbers that MLSE has gotten to. Like I think they sold it, I think it was what, 1.5 billion when they originally sold it, I believe. The teachers' pension when they sold it to Bell and to Rogers. I think that's what they had purchased Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment for from them.
1.32 billion.
1.32 billion. And today, and that was a split venture. We'll say, between three entities. And today, Bell Media got 4.7 billion for just 37.5% of that entity. quite wild, from 1.32 billion to 12.5 billion dollars in what, 13, 14 years. Yeah,
Yeah.
quite a big time jump, quite the investment, we'll say, from Bell and Rogers, and Bell's cashing out on that investment, I guess. And we'll see what that means for the Maple Leafs and what it means for the Toronto media landscape moving forward. That being said, it was a big day at Leafs camp. So let's take a break. Let's come back and let's get into what we learned. We heard from the coach, the GM. Brendan Shanahan was there, the president. We heard from the new captain, and we heard from Marner, Tavares, Nylander, and Morgan Riley. Actually, Nylander didn't speak today, but we heard from Morgan Riley. There was a lot of questions about Nylander, so we'll get into all of that and more on the other side. It's Mike DiStefano and David Morassutti. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime has this new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. They've got all-in pricing. They've got great seat views where you can get a panoramic view from your seat, the exact site you're going to see in the app before you buy it. And they've got the lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. The season is upon us. Maple Leafs games available right now over on Gametime. Download the Gametime app today. What is it? Gametime. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you here on the show. You can find us each and every day, Monday through Friday, wherever you get your podcasts, and also up on YouTube. Big day, and we've been doing a Leafs burning question every day this week ahead of training camp. And I guess the big burning question stemming from today, Media Day, is what do we learn from day one at Leafs camp after hearing what the players, management, coach all had to say? So I'll leave it up to you. What is the biggest takeaway, I suppose, or one of the biggest takeaways? We'll dive into a few of them here. But what was the biggest one you think you got from today?
Well, don't ask about contracts because they don't want to talk about them.
They or Mitch? Like, I thought Tavares actually...
I'll say no. Don't ask about Mitch Marner's contract.
Yeah, because there was quite the contrast there with that discussion. Like, at least Tavares, he came out and allowed the question to be asked. And he said, I appreciate the question. I understand it. And it's not something I want to be focusing on every day, but I want to be here long term. I want to be a Maple Leaf. We'll see what happens, right? He gave somewhat of a hockey speak answer, but at least acknowledged he wants to be here. And he answered the question somewhat. Mitch Marner, he sat down and said, thank you all for coming. Hope you all had a good summer, but don't you dare ask me about my contract because I ain't saying squat, essentially. I paraphrase, but that's basically how he started his press conference, and he just shut it down right from the get-go. No one was able to ask anything. He didn't say anything about the contract, no follow-ups, no nothing. And I got to tell you, I don't like it. Like we talked about it yesterday. There is a time and a place where it makes sense to talk about contracts, especially Mitch Marner's contract, given who he is, what he means to the team, the market that he's in. His charity event, that wasn't the time or the place. I'll give him that for not wanting to talk about it there. Sure. The captaincy announcement, that was Austin's day. You're not going to talk about it there. I get it. He can easily deflect on that day. Day one of training camp, that is the time. That is the place where reporters have the right to ask that question and have the right to get an answer to it. Not necessarily a firm, definitive answer, but at least get some sort of answer like Tavares gave. He didn't even offer that as a possibility because he sat down and said, don't you dare ask because I ain't saying nothing. I'm worried about and focused on training camp and this upcoming season. First question.
I mean, and he brought up the good old, it's a privilege to be a Leaf.
Yeah, because they're treated like gods. Remember, treated like gods.
Yeah, I'm glad he recognizes the privilege it is to be a Leaf. Because you know what? Once in a while, you're gonna have to answer a question.
Well, it's a company that is worth $12.5 billion. I mean, he might be looking to get some of that scratch in his jeans.
The part that I know, the part of this, if he did exactly what John Tavares did, at least you had something of an inkling, right? For those who don't know, John Tavares pretty much said, I would like to be here. I'd like to be here long term. This is where I want to be. That's a satisfying answer to me.
Yep. And I believe it. I believe he wants to be here.
Essentially what he did is he kind of put the ball in the Leafs court, right?
Yep.
Because now it's up to the Leafs to figure out what they want to do for a contract.
100%.
With Marner, it's a privilege to be a Leaf, but I'm not talking about whether I'm going to be signing here. Essentially is what he's saying.
Yeah,
because
he's putting the ball in their court, but the ball in their court isn't bring me an offer. It's you know what I want.
Yeah,
you're either gonna pay up or you're not.
You paid two. You paid Willie and Austin a good chunk of change. I'll see if you do the same for me. It's essentially what we. And the thing is, he opens it up for the speculation by doing with the way he kind of talks and doesn't talk and things like that. And
that becomes a story, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the story. That's what we're talking about. Marner spoke for 7 minutes today, Dave. 7 minutes.
Yeah.
That was the story. His opening statement, which was all 16 seconds long. That was the story.
It's funny because, and then you hear, what's the funny thing for Mitch Marner? Mitch Marner has like the PR team that he has. I'm not talking about his own PR team because he doesn't even need to do it himself. He's got Austin Matthews doing it for him. He's got John Tavares doing it for him. He even has Nathan McKinnon doing it for him. You know how many people ran with the Nathan McKinnon line about how much, Marner takes and like everything that Marner goes through in Toronto?
Yeah. Called him one of the best players in the world. Yeah.
Better than you, Nate? Better than you?
Well, no.
No, right?
Definitely not.
It's a gun to his head. Nathan McKinnon, is he a better player than you?
Well, he didn't say the best. He said one of the best, and McKinnon is also one of the best. But yeah, and I believe Mitch even acknowledged the support that he's gotten from his peers. Within his 7 minute availability when it comes to people coming to his defense over the summer. And look, like I get it. I think Leaf fans have taken it a little overboard with the Mitch narrative. How we don't need him, trade him, get rid of him. He's a bad egg. He's spoiled rotten. Like there's a lot of stuff that Leaf fans have said. They flung a lot of poop at him this offseason. Some of it warranted just based on the contract situation, but let's also not lose sight of the fact that he is one of the best 20 players on the planet. I still believe he is. We're talking about a guy who could touch up on 100 points and is always in the Selke conversation. There's not a lot of guys who can do that. Like there just isn't. So he's a tremendous player and he will get paid and he deserves to be paid a good amount of money. But is he going to dig his heels in and just get his? Or is he going to leave a little money on the table? Is he just going to say, you know what? I don't need 13. Give me 12-6. Just put me a little bit above Willie. Just give me 12-6, a little above Willie. Just let the pecking orders there, Austin, Marner, Willie, and we can move on and let's keep her going. But I don't get the sense that he's willing to do that. But we'll see. I wish there would have been at least a couple of questions. I wish somebody would have been able to ask him, like, are you okay with playing into the season? Are you hoping to get something done by training camp? Is there a drop dead date where you want to, cut negotiations off? Like, is there any urgency? Are you still talking negotiation? Or is your agent at least still talking negotiations? Like, those questions are legitimate. And I wish that there was a chance to ask them, but he walked in and just said, don't ask about my contract because you ain't getting any answers. Let's move on and talk about the season. It's like
the only thing I heard differently about that is that Elliot Friedman was talking on the I'm forgetting the show now, but the late radio show with Ailish Forfar and Justin Cuthbert, and he said essentially Marner's not going to be that player that says if I don't have a contract done by this time, don't send me anything. He feels like if there's a contract offer midway through the year, Mitch will entertain it.
Yeah.
He's not gonna be that player that says, if I don't hear anything by this point, don't bother coming back to me. It's gonna be similar to Willie, I think.
Yeah,
In that way.
possibly, or they play it out the rest of the year, which I think is possible too. See how he
Oh, yeah.
meshes with Craig Berube and see how he performs in the playoffs. Like that's
If I'm the
really
Leafs,
what
you
we
know
want to
what?
know.
Yeah, see how he performs in the playoffs at this rate.
Yeah,
See
but
if they,
then you risk losing him for nothing. So
you
it's
do.
a bit of a catch-22.
Oh, there's definitely that, and it's going to be talked about all year. It's gonna, and the next time Brad Treliving speaks to the media, it's going to be talked about. And Brad Treliving knows this. Like, this is not a new scenario for Brad Treliving.
Yeah.
He's done it. He's been through it twice. Didn't exactly go his way, unfortunately.
Yeah. No, it hasn't. And it hasn't really gone his way almost his whole career. Because rest in peace to Johnny Gaudreau, but that situation didn't go well for him in Calgary. And then when he got here to Toronto, I don't know if he was worried about fracturing a relationship like he did with the Gaudreau camp, but ended up paying Austin more money than anyone else has made in the NHL. And then the exact same thing, William Nylander paid him a bunch of money. Mitch Marner sitting there saying, all right, it's my turn. And all of a sudden, he's going to play hardball. Marner probably not a big fan of that, but we'll see, man. We'll see what happens. Obviously, day one of camp, that's one of the biggest stories is Marner, shutting down the contract conversation, which just heats up that conversation even more. And I'm sure we'll talk about it a lot more between now and the day where that contract is either inevitably signed or he's traded or he walks. We'll see what happens and go from there. Lots of other things though that I picked up on from day one of training camp. Let's take another break. We'll come back and dive into what else we learned from the Maple Leafs day one media availabilities. That's coming up next here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We got something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon at a market game. All you got to do is have a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com. Slap down a $5 bet. You like the Maple Leafs to win the cup? They're 15-1 plus 1,500. Slap down a $5. If they finally hoist Lord Stanley, you'll be happy because not only are you going to win your bet, but you also get yourself a free trial of YouTube TV's NFL Sunday Ticket. And you can only do that by downloading America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti, reacting to day one of Maple Leafs camp. They checked in, did their physicals. They did the Leafs media availability. We got a chance to hear from a bunch of characters with the Maple Leafs. So what's something else, Dave, outside of the Marner and the Tavares contract discourse that you picked up on that is a big takeaway from you today?
Well, we debated it a couple of days ago. We finally heard from Craig Berube's mouth that Nylander is going to be starting camp at center.
Yep.
And,
Willie. Yep. Go ahead.
Well, and what surprised me about it, and somebody brought this up to me, and I didn't think about it. Given the type of coach that Craig Berube is, for him to already be willing to try Nylander at center, that's pretty interesting.
Well, yeah, it's probably pretty telling to what they think Tavares can be at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if they're trying Nylander at center and they're going to give this a legitimate go, not just a couple of preseason games like last year we saw happen in training camp. It sounds like they're going to give it an actual effort to see if it could work. They're not doing this just for funsies. I think they're doing it out of necessity. They desperately feel like they need another middle six centerman. And the guy who fits the bill best, apparently, is William Nylander in their eyes. If he can fill in at 2C, and then you can slot Tavares down to the 3 hole, he's a perfect third-line center. We've been talking about it all summer. That's the biggest hole, the biggest need. John Tavares might be the best third-line center in the NHL, if that turns out to be the case. So, yeah, he's going to start at camp down the middle. Domi will be playing wing. That was also determined today. Now, again, to start, if it doesn't work out, could possibly see a change at some point here. But yeah, that was definitely a massive talking point, leading up to camp, and tomorrow we'll get to see it or today, I suppose, we'll get to see it when they hit the ice for their first on ice training session. William Nylander going to be down the middle. He's going to be trying to win some faceoffs. Going to be down below the dots, and excited to see what it looks like for old Willie boy as the number 2C. Big boy hockey is back, Dave. That is something that I learned from today's media availabilities. Couple of things. When asked what style or how Craig Berube wants this team to play, he mentioned this is a team that's going to play a north-south style of hockey. They're going to be tough to play against. They're going to be hard checking and structured. And a big part of doing all of those things, you got to have the right guys out there. And big boys is what we're talking about. And I don't know if you could pull up the tweet here, but our good buddy Kyle Cushman, friend of the show, doing God's work, showing us exactly at the weigh-ins who put on weight at camp. And just look at the beefy boys that are coming into camp this year. Matthew Nyes, 227 pounds. He put on 10 pounds. Matthew Nyes did over the offseason. Benoit put on another 6 pounds. He's up to 211. Grabankin put on 18 pounds. Now at 6'2", 210 pounds, vying for a spot with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Timothy Liljegren and Holmberg both putting on double-digit weight over the summer, getting themselves up over the 200-pound mark. And Liljegren, I want to focus on him for a second, Dave, because I think that one is notable. How many times have we been watching games and we see this guy get boxed out and pushed out and just is unable to really hold his own in front of the goaltender, right? Like in the blue paint, he's getting pushed around, boxed out all the time. Well, you add on an extra 11 pounds, and now all of a sudden you're 201 pounds instead of 188, 190. Well, that makes you a little bit more difficult to push around. So I thought that was pretty notable. And other guys, Holmberg again adding 13 pounds, Connor Dewar 16 pounds, McMahon put some weight on. I think it's very notable to see a lot of these players putting on some weight. I think that they understand what Craig Berube is going to be asking of these guys and the style of hockey that they're going to play. And I really think that message was received in the offseason, and that was a big point of emphasis for this group.
I do think that. And, Brad Treliving also talked about Grabankin. Like when he was talking about young guys he expects to push, he talked about Easton Cowan. Obviously, Fraser Minton, for those that don't know, he's dealing with a high ankle sprain. So probably going to be a few weeks before we even see him on the ice. But you said Grabankin's a guy, we expect him to push for a spot, right? And like you see how many of those, as you saw how many of those guys, saw a big jump in their weight. And look, some will say they packed on the pounds, but it's muscle, right? Too. Like these guys are bulking up.
Right.
Like did Matthew Nyes need to bulk up a bit more? Probably not. But when you see how much Matthew Nyes now weighs, that you're getting into power forward territory. Like he was already considered power forward, but like this makes him puts him in a little higher echelon with that by adding that muscle.
You're trying just to get stronger, right? Like whether it's in a lower body frame where you're trying to get faster, right? With lower body and core strength, or if you're trying to get stronger with upper body strength, this is a guy, if he ends up playing alongside Matthews and Marner up in the top 6 on that top line, he's going to be tested to go into the corners and try and grab pucks off guys. He's going to be in there on the forecheck and be expected to win some puck battles. I mean, the stronger you are, the lot easier it is to do that, right? The heavier you are, the easier it is, or the harder it is for your opposition to push you off pucks. So, and that goes for all of these players. McMahon, Liljegren when he's in his own zone, Pontus Holmberg, who put on some weight, the same goes for all of these guys. So they want to be playing that north-south style game, forecheck, backcheck, paycheck, bro. That's the kind of style that Craig Berube is all about. And when assuming that they packed on the pounds and didn't lose any speed, should be in a pretty good spot for a lot of these guys moving forward. So, big boy hockey seems to be back. You look at the playoffs and the winners, the cup winners last couple of years, it's size, skill, and speed. And that's kind of the modern day perfect hockey player. And it seems like the Maple Leafs really took that and ran with it with their nutrition and their workouts this summer. A lot of guys packing on the pounds, hoping to be tougher and harder to play against this upcoming season.
And Berube wants the size in the blue on the blue line.
Yes. Well, that's on top of, like OEL, Tanev, Hakanpää, Pacioretty, like these additions that they made also as free agents were also big boys. Like they're also big dudes, physical guys who are hard to play against. So that's going to be the identity. He threw out the word identity and he wants to be known as a hard team to play against, which has not been what the Maple Leafs have been known for over the last few years. Berube wants to change that, and I respect it. I'm hopeful that it comes through that way. I'll be curious to see how intense the first couple of days in training camps are. I'll be curious to see how intense the first preseason game is. Do we see guys trying to prove themselves, running around, checking? Checking was also a word that was used a couple of times by both Tree and Berube, talking about how they want to be a good checking team. So I'll be curious to see if these teams or these players are going to be throwing their weight around early on in camp, especially once the preseason games start as well.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the playoff style hockey, you look at the teams they have to go up against. Boston, heavy checking team. Florida, heavy checking team. Tampa, they're a heavy checking team. Like Atlantic Division, that's what it takes, right?
Yep, New York, heavy checking team. Like even once you get out of the division, that's what it is. The other side, Edmonton, Colorado, Vegas, heavy checking teams. It's heavy hockey is back. Big boy hockey is back, and the Maple Leafs are finally joining the party. Anything else that stood out to you today?
I mean, we got those injury updates. Ben Danford, unfortunately, the concussion, that's a tough one to hear, considering, you want to see, I'm sure you'll eventually see him, but that's someone I want to see, and we haven't been able to get that opportunity yet. So that's unfortunate.
Connor Dewar also won't be starting camp. He had shoulder surgery over the off season. He won't be ready to go to start. Unsure of a timeline. Tree Living didn't provide a timeline, but he won't be starting, which is someone who I was expecting to battle for one of those kind of final spots on the roster. So no Dewar, no Danford. Fraser Minton, you already mentioned, who was injured in that rookie game, high ankle sprain. He'll be out for a little bit. And Ryan Tverberg also had shoulder surgery and won't be around for the start of camp, but is set to return soon. So that's the full injury update, by the way.
Yeah, so when you look at,
I guess.
Yeah, and I don't think we discussed John Gillies was added on a PTO.
Yeah.
So now they got 7 goaltenders. They're going to be hanging around when camp starts, and then eventually that'll be reduced.
I mean, John Gillies, I believe, was with Tree Living in Calgary, so I wonder if that was like throwing him a bone, because it just they have enough goalies, I think, at camp. So I think they were just doing a solid for Gillies. I don't expect for him to be a factor onto this team, but he did sign a PTO, so we did get a late PTO for the Maple Leafs coming into training camp. Actually, you know what are you laughing at?
No, a good friend of mine said, that unfortunately a player's career has gone one way, where he's wearing the gear from one team, but the pads from another team that he was playing for.
Yeah, well, at least it's still training camp and not the real thing. The one other thing, actually, I don't know if you heard Morgan Riley's comments when he spoke today, but a little bit of a different vibe from Mo. He kind of, put it on the table and said, quote, "Our goal will always be to win a Stanley Cup, and anything short of that will be a failure." Haven't quite heard that many like definitive proclamations about this team when it comes to winning and wanting a cup. That was one. I kind of appreciated that from Mo, putting it out there.
I'm a big Morgan Riley fan because he's honest. He says what needs to be said, not necessarily what the team will probably want to hear, but he's honest. And this is a player that's been here for a long time. Right? Drafted in 2012. He hasn't really experienced a lot of success. And now, and And now, I think it's the realization from him. He's not, he's not the younger guy he once was when he was here. There's, he's getting up there in age.
Clock's ticking.
Clock's ticking. They brought in quite a few veteran players. They didn't go out and go with youth, right? They went with a more of a we got to win now approach. Like it's kind of always talked about the cup. Maybe it was talked a lot too early in the process, right? When Babcock was here and they got Tavares and all those things, but like it's gotten to the point where it kind of has to be, right?
Yeah, cup or bust. Like it's gotten to that point. And not to go back to the whole MLSE and the sale and Richard and Petty and all that, but Shanahan's, the clock's ticking for him too. Like he's in must win mode at this point. Like this is a big season for him. The belief is actually his contract's up at the end of the year. So there's got to be a tangible difference in this season, I think, for him to remain as president, especially with this new sale, with Petty coming in. So, like the goal is to win a Stanley Cup, and that's got to be the goal for this group. It's been 7 years, and I know they haven't taken many steps. They finally won a round a couple of years ago, but they got to win, a few rounds this year, right? Like one round isn't enough anymore, right?
No.
This is a team that ultimately want to compete for a cup. Are they? Is it a roster that looks like a cup contender right this second? Maybe not, but with some additions at the deadline, some guys take those next steps. You get those internal improvements, which is another buzzword that was used today. Maybe it does look like a cup team come March or come next April once the Stanley Cup playoffs start. So it's going to be an exciting season. I'm excited to see what the lineups look like today at training camp. We'll get our first line rushes and get a glimpse into what Craig Berube is thinking. I think we're going to have to push the lineup projection to tomorrow's show. We kind of ran out of time. There's just a lot going on today.
Yeah.
The MLSE sale kind of put a wrinkle into that idea to do the lineup projection anyways. So we'll do the lineup projection tomorrow, and that'll be for Friday's show. But that'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content Monday through Friday. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti, and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back another episode for you guys tomorrow, reacting to day 2, the on-ice sessions of Maple Leafs training camp. Until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.